All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump right into the buyer broker agreement. There are 4 versions of this agreement. So they have the single agent, transition to transaction broker, and no brokerage relationship. We're going to go ahead and talk about the transaction broker. That's what you're going to see up on the screen, simply because that's the one that most everybody uses. The other ones are available in Form Simplicity and Transaction Desk, so you can go ahead and take a look at those if you'd like to. Basically, it's just a separate page with that, Florida Statute 475 information so people understand what the relationship is. I did send these documents to you as an attachment with your Zoom link, so you should have them. Hopefully you were able to print them out and take some notes, but I would encourage you to take some notes down. So the first thing you're going to notice when you read through this form is that the word seller has been replaced with owner. The word seller has been replaced with owner. And the word buyer has been replaced by consumer. So I would definitely make note of those. Number 1 on the contract, it says the parties, it has the consumer and it has the broker. You'll notice if you're familiar with this document that they went ahead and they took out the office. There used to be a place to put office. So you're going to put the broker's name, not the brokerage name, but the broker's name. And then your name as well. And it says the consumer grants the broker the exclusive right to work and assist the consumer in locating and negotiating the acquisition of suitable real property as described below. The term acquire or acquisition includes any purchase, option, exchange, lease, or other acquisition of an ownership or equity interest in real property. And we'll talk more about what that looks like at a few pages. We have the term of the contract, number 2. This agreement will begin on whatever it is that the broker and customer or you and the customer decide upon. And we'll terminate at 11:59 p.m. on the whatever date you decide. So just keep in mind that this can be a 2-day agreement. It can be a 2-month agreement. It can be a 6-month agreement. It is whatever the customer and the broker agree to. What I would do is I would kind of look at the market and how long is it taking to kind of find a house, bring a house to contract, and how long is the customer in town for? We know we have a lot of snowbirds and things, or people who just come for a week or 2 at a time. You probably don't want a 6-month contract with somebody who's only going to be in town for 2 weeks. So again, that's up to your broker to determine what that would look like, but there is flexibility there. Moving on to number 3, property. The consumer is interested in acquiring real property as follows or otherwise acceptable to the consumer. So they have the type of property. Again, you're going to speak with your broker. This can be condo, single family home, residential. You can be as specific or general as whatever you decide with your customer. And then location, you can have Florida, Charlotte County, Port Charlotte, Deep Creek. So again, as specific or as general as you and your customer agree to. Again, if you're familiar with this form, you'll notice that they took out the price range, whether or not the customer was pre-qualified or pre-approved, and then the terms and conditions section. So they just made this a little bit shorter. Moving on to the broker obligations. Says the broker will assist. You have to forgive me, I'm getting new glasses and these are my old ones and they're not working super well. Use the broker's professional knowledge and skills. Discuss property requirements and assist the consumer in locating and viewing suitable properties. Assist the consumer in negotiating and closing any resulting transaction. Cooperate with real estate licensees working with the owner, if any, to complete the transaction. And then we have other consumers. Consumer understands that the broker may work with other prospective customers who want to acquire the same property as the consumer. This entire section B here, you see that I have part of it highlighted. I would highlight this part, make sure that you're thoroughly aware of how this works, and also make sure that your customer understands how this works, because you don't want them getting mad at you later down the road if you're showing the same house to somebody else and they find out about it, right? Make sure they're clear on what the agreement states. If the broker submits offers by competing customers, the broker will notify the consumer that a competing offer has been made, but will not disclose any of the offer's material terms or conditions. The consumer agrees that the broker may make competing consumers aware of the existence of any offer the consumer makes, so long as the broker does not reveal any material terms or conditions or the offer without the consumer's prior written consent. So no secrets in real estate here. We can share that information. The consumer understands that even if the broker is compensated by an owner or a real estate licensee who is working with the owner, such compensation does not compromise the broker's duties to the customer. We have our fair housing statement there. The broker adheres to the principles expressed in the Fair Housing Act and will not participate in any act that is unlawful, discriminates on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, country of national origin, or any other category protected under the federal, state, or local law. For service providers, the broker does not warrant or guarantee products or services provided by a third party who the broker, at the consumer's request, refers or recommends to the consumer in connection with property acquisition. Of course, that's our home inspectors, mortgage professionals, that kind of thing. All right, moving on to the consumer obligations. This is a really important piece to make sure that they understand. And you'll see again, I highlighted portions of this. If I highlight it, I would encourage you to highlight it as well and make sure that you're really going through this with your customers. The consumer agrees to cooperate with the broker in accomplishing the objectives of this agreement, including conducting all negotiations and efforts to locate suitable property only through the broker and referring to the broker all inquiries of any kind from real estate licensees, property owners, or other sources. If the consumer contracts or is contacted by an owner or real estate licensee who is working with an owner or views a property unaccompanied by the broker, the consumer at the first opportunity will advise the owner or real estate licensee that the consumer is working with and represented exclusively by the buyer. It's so important that they understand this, that if they sign this agreement with you and then they kind of go rogue, go to an open house and don't tell the person that they're represented, go into a new home build and don't tell the builder that they're represented, they have to understand that they're still going to owe you a commission. Even if they purchase a property without you, they're still going to owe you a commission. So make sure that they understand that piece. Item B, providing the broker and necessary third parties, any lender, closing agent, etc., with accurate information requested by the broker or third parties in connection with ensuring the customer's ability to acquire property. The consumer authorizes the broker to run a credit check and verify the consumer's credit information. I wouldn't get too hung up on that piece. I know we typically don't run consumers' credit. It's there. Probably not going to use it. So it is what it is. I'm not sure why they chose to include that. So we know that getting a mortgage today is much different than somebody getting a mortgage, say, 15 years ago. We have to set the expectation for our customers so they understand that if the underwriter asks them for the same form 3 times or asks them for things that they don't think they should have to provide, they're obligated to provide that. If they, don't go through with this or they default because they don't want to give the mortgage person all of the information, then they're in breach of this and they're still going to owe you a commission. So again, it's really important that they understand closing is not contingent upon them paying you. All right, item C, being available to meet with the broker at reasonable times for consultations and to view properties. D, indemnifying and holding the broker harmless from and against any losses, damages, costs, and expenses of any kind, including attorney's fees from liability to any person that the broker incurs because of acting on the consumer's behalf. Not asking or expecting to restrict the acquisition of property according to race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, country of national origin, or any other category protected under federal, state, or local law. Consulting with appropriate professionals from legal, tax, environmental, engineering, foreign reporting requirements, and other specialized advice. Remember that we have to stay in our lane and we have to stay within the confines of what our license allows us to do. And that does not include commenting on the condition of the roof or how this might affect their tax purposes. You want to make sure they go to the correct professionals for that. The last part of this section is item G, making a diligent, good faith effort to perform on the contract terms of any purchase agreement or contract to lease and close of sale of any property the consumer contracts to acquire. So they have to do their part as well. They can't just kind of disappear on you. Just make sure I don't have anyone in the waiting room. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to number 6. This is retainer. They've made some changes to this section as well. It used to be that if a customer paid you a retainer, there was an option to kind of credit that back to them at closing. That option has been taken out. That doesn't mean you can't credit them back. It just means that the option is not pre-printed for you. So it says a non-refundable retainer fee of, I don't know, whatever you might decide to charge. for the broker services provided for the consumer is earned and payable upon execution of this agreement. This retainer is in addition to any compensation earned by the broker. Broker and consumer agree the retainer for the real estate services described herein and does not constitute a fee paid for rental information list as described in section 475.453 of the Florida statute, if everybody remembers that from pre-license. So really important to note, the moment that they sign this contract with you, that's when that retainer is due. So they are either writing a check, wiring the money to your broker, however it is, you're going to receive that. Talk to your broker ahead of time so you know how to handle that when the time comes. But payable at the time this document is executed. Number 7, compensation. This entire first paragraph, I would really kind of go over with them and make sure that you and they understand. So the broker's compensation is earned when, during the term of this agreement or any renewal or extension, consumer or any person acting on behalf of the consumer contracts to acquire real property as specified in this agreement, or defaults on any contract to acquire property. This compensation is for the broker services for the consumer. Compensation received by the broker, if any, from an owner or owner's broker for services rendered to the consumer will reduce any amount owed by the consumer in this paragraph. So it says a lot right there, right? So if the property closes, they're going to pay you. If they default on a contract, they're still obligated to pay you. Whether or not your broker is going to charge them, I don't know, but they're still obligated to pay you for that. Whatever you're compensated, if you are from either the seller or the seller's broker, that's going to reduce the amount they owe you. So let's say that they owe you 50%, and what's being offered is 45, then they'll only have to pay you 5 to make up the difference. All right, for 7A, we have purchase or exchange. You're filling out all of this because you're either going to be writing a number amount, a percentage amount, 0 or NA. We never want to leave anything blank. We want to make sure that we're filling in all of the blanks here. The reason we do that is we don't want anything to be ambiguous. If we get called into a courtroom 18 months from now, we probably won't remember why we didn't fill something in, okay? So for the first section here, you're going to choose either the first part or the second part. You're either going to charge a dollar amount or a percentage of the purchase price. The other option is you're going to charge a dollar amount or a percentage of the purchase price plus another dollar amount. So perhaps you typically charge a percentage plus a transaction fee. You would use the second portion of A. If you only charge a flat fee or a percent, you would use the first portion of A, okay? Goes on to say, of the total purchase price or other consideration for the acquired property, payable no later than the date of closing specified in the sales contract. However, closing is not a prerequisite for the broker's fees being earned. Again, they say it multiple times in this agreement that you're going to have with your customer. If the buyer defaults, you're still entitled to your compensation. Now, some people do lease agreements, some people don't do lease agreements. Again, I would have something filled in here. If you're strictly not going to do leases, perhaps you're going to write NA in all of these boxes. If you think it's something that you might entertain, talk to your broker and determine what you're going to put in. But this reads very similarly to the first part. You're either going to do a dollar amount or a percentage of a certain amount of months rent. I don't know, that could be 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, I have no idea, okay? Or you're going to do a dollar amount or a percentage of plus a dollar amount of the gross lease value. So you're either doing it for a certain amount of months or you're doing it for the gross lease. If the consumer enters into a lease to purchase agreement, the amount of the leasing fee, which the broker receives, will be credited toward the amount due the broker for the purchase. Number C, an option. If y'all remember what an option is, I have an Uncle Frank, and Uncle Frank wants to sell his house in the next 6 months. I'm up for a promotion, but I don't know if I'm going to get that promotion for at least another 3 months. So I'm going to create an option with Uncle Frank to purchase his house. I'm going to give him $500 for the option. There has to be money attached to the option for it to be feasible or legal. So I'm going to give him $500. If I get that promotion and I decide to buy his house, he is obligated to sell me the house. I am at no time obligated to purchase the house. So if you think you might work with options, you're going to fill this section in as well. The broker will be paid either a dollar amount or a percentage of the option amount. And you're going to select only one there to be paid when the consumer enters into the option agreement. If the consumer enters into a lease with option to purchase, the broker will be compensated for both the lease and the option. Item D, other. The broker will be compensated for all other types of acquisitions as if such acquisition was a purchase or an exchange. And then there's a section E for additional fees. I don't know what that might be, but there is a section there to do that. I would speak to your broker and be very careful what you write into a contract. That's where a lot of people get themselves into trouble because they write something that's ambiguous. It's not very clear as to what they meant. And that's where things can kind of get dicey. So be very careful of that, especially if you're a newer agent and haven't done that before. All right, so moving on to number 8, this is a protection period. The consumer will compensate the broker if if left blank 30 days after the termination date. I think it's really great that they added this 30-day option in here. Change the screen. Because it wasn't there before. And I've seen protection periods be up to a year or more, which seems a little bit unfair. I don't know. So whatever your customer and the broker agrees to, the consumer contracts to acquire any property which was called to the consumer's attention by the broker or any other person or found by the consumer during the term of the agreement. So if this contract cancels during that protection period, if they go back and try and purchase one of those properties you called to their attention or something they found while they were working with you, they're still going to owe you compensation. The consumer's obligation to pay the broker's fee ceases upon the consumer entering into a good faith exclusive buyer-broker agreement with another broker after the termination date. So when this document terminates, the next day they sign a new buyer-broker agreement with a different agent, you're no longer entitled to anything. The protection period just goes away. They're working with somebody new. All right, for 9 and 10, this is great. The conditional termination and the dispute resolution. This mimics our listing agreement exactly. So this is the same words. We don't even have to learn anything new. I think that's really great. But again, it's something that you're going to want to talk to your customers about. So for conditional termination, at the customer's request, the broker may agree to conditionally terminate this agreement. If the broker agrees to a conditional termination of this agreement, the consumer must enter a written agreement to that effect and pay a cancellation fee of, I don't know, whatever you decide. The broker may void the conditional termination and the consumer will pay the fee stated in the compensation paragraph, less the cancellation fee if, from the early termination date to the termination date plus the protection period, if applicable, the consumer contracts to acquire any property which prior to being an early termination date was found by the consumer or called to the consumer's attention by the broker or any other person. So if you have a 6-month contract with someone and after 3 they ask you to terminate it and you agree, and then they go and try and purchase property you called to their attention or they found while they were under contract with you, again, they still owe you that compensation. I'm not going to read the entire dispute resolution section, but basically what this says is under Florida law, you must mediate first. That is the first step to any kind of dispute. If you initial in this paragraph, that means you're decided that you're going to arbitrate. So if mediation does not work, you go strictly to arbitration. If nobody initials here, you're more than likely going to go to litigation. Kind of NAR, Florida Realtors, everybody encourages people to do arbitration because it's less money basically for everyone. And it's much, much faster. So you want to have that conversation and let your broker tell you how he would like for you to proceed there. All right, number 11, we have the assignment. Persons bound. The broker may assign this agreement to another broker. This agreement will bind and inure the broker and consumer's heir, personal representatives, successors, and assignees. So this is the sentence that basically says, for example, if you decide that you're going to change brokerages and you're working with buyers and you have some active listings, if your broker allows it, this is the sentence that allows you to take those with you without having to re-sign all new documents. Also, if there's some kind of situation where your broker is incapacitated, no longer available, somebody else can step in and nothing has to be redone because this sentence allows for it not to be. We have the brokerage relationship. This comes directly out of Chapter 475. This is a transaction broker relationship agreement. The broker will act as a transaction broker. The broker will deal honestly and fairly, will account for all funds and use skill, care, and diligence in the transaction. Will disclose all known facts that materially affect the value of residential property, which are not readily observable to the buyer. Will present all offers and counter offers in a timely manner unless directed otherwise in writing, and will have limited confidentiality with the buyer unless waived in writing. And then it goes on for other terms, and I'm going to say the same thing I said before. Be very careful what you decide to handwrite into the contract. And then we have this new acknowledgement modification wording that you'll see is not only bolded, but is also underlined. So you know it's really important that we go over this piece with our customers. The consumer has read this agreement and understand its content. This agreement cannot be changed except by written agreement signed by both parties. Electronic signatures will be acceptable and binding. The broker's commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Broker may not receive compensation from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to with the consumer. However, the consumer agrees that the broker may receive separate compensation from the owner of the property for services rendered to the owner by the broker, for which the consumer will not be responsible. In that instance, you might have both sides of the transaction. So make note of what this says as well, because I know a lot of builders and things right now are giving bonuses on top of their regular compensation. You cannot receive that unless you have a modification to this agreement, which the official modification has not come out yet, but I would just do an addendum, and your customer has to sign that agreeing to you receiving that additional compensation. So if this agreement that with your customer says 20% and somebody is offering 25, you cannot receive it unless they do a modification adding an additional 5%. So I hope everybody's clear on that piece. All right, and then you just have the customer name, signature, date, area, and of course you're going to initial the bottom. All right, it is 11:05, so we are back. We did get a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm just going to go through those quickly because there's just a couple of them. Somebody asked, where is owner in the agreement? It's all throughout the agreement, but specifically you can see it in number 5 where it talks about consumer obligations. If I have a listing, do I have to fill out this form to show a buyer my listing? Yes, you absolutely do. Now, if you're hosting an open house, you're representing the seller, buyers can come through, okay? But if you have a listing and somebody calls on your sign and says, hey, will you show this to me? You absolutely have to have a written agreement. That can be either a buyer broker agreement or it can be a showing agreement. They have not released the new showing agreement yet, but we do expect that any day. In that instance, likely I would do a showing agreement for just that one time off and then try and convert them, to a buyer broker agreement. Can you just state any additional bonuses offered by the builder? My answer to that, from what I have heard through other sources, is no. It has to be very specific. It has to be a dollar amount or a percentage. You can contact the legal hotline on that one if you'd like more information, but my answer to that is no. I would just carry around a modification form or an addendum form, and if I go to a builder and the builder's like, hey, we're offering, this plus X, and that's not what my agreement says, I would have already had that conversation with my customer, and I just, fill out that form and ask them to sign it at that time. If I'm a listing agent and a buyer calls me and that is not currently working with anyone, do I still have to? I think we already went through that one. Yes, you do. Yeah, so again, I know it's going to be more work and I know it's going to be difficult. Like, you might go to, 5 houses and 3 builders in one day, right? So just carry those forms with you. This one again is asking about the modification and when is it signed. So just carry the form with you, and if you need to utilize it, utilize it. But again, I would have already had that conversation with my customer. Our last question, if the seller or owner of the property decides to pay 25% and we have a modification for that, but the buyer's agreement was for 20%, are they off the hook for paying their 20%? Yes, they're off the hook for that. That's what it says in the buyer broker agreement, that you cannot receive any more than what you've agreed to. Of course, with the modification you can, but you're not like adding the 25 and the 20 and getting 55, right? So you can only get whatever the most amount is with the modification.